Welcome back to episode 3 of Taking Inventory. I'm Daniel Druger.
I'm James Morrow.
And we're back with another exciting week. This week, we have a special guest, Andrew Covato. Andrew has over 15 years of ad and growth experience at companies like eBay, Google, Meta, Netflix, and he was most recently leading global measurement and insights at Snap. During his career, Andrew's been a leader in building first and third-party measurement systems for all of these ad platforms and has designed media buying and optimization systems that have managed over $1 billion of annual spend. Andrew also invests, consults, and advises ad tech companies globally, and he's sat on numerous industry boards and working groups.
We also refer to him as Measurement Jesus. So we're very excited to have Andrew here. And Andrew, I guess before we dive into, hopefully, I don't know if that background is a good kind of overview, but we've been fortunate enough that we worked with Andrew at Snap, and he really was a huge part of a lot of the success that platform had pre a lot of the measurement stuff that we're now facing today, which we'd love to talk to Andrew about. So I guess before we get into that stuff, just kind of want to know from your perspective, what did measurement mean at different companies and at different times throughout your career? Because today measurement feels like it's sort of half optimization, half privacy, kind of half even analytics. So just love to get your point of view on that.
Thank you, guys. First of all, super pumped to be here. Really, really excited that you invited me to talk about all these topics, which are super near and dear to my heart. Very passionate about measurement. I have to point out, James, that you said half 3 times, so that would be 1.5. It would be a bad measurement person if I didn't point that out. Second of all, Measurement Jesus is not a moniker that I give to myself, just for the record. So please send the complaints directly to James and Daniel, not to me. But other than that, I'd love to talk about this measurement. Measurement's gone through a crazy amount of evolution. Weirdly, it hasn't over the time that I've spent working in it. I would say, when I first got into measurement, I didn't really have any background in marketing or digital marketing or an ad tech, but I did have, some academic experience in my studies doing design experiments. And so I really thought that was how everybody figured out, tested hypotheses and figured out if something was working. And I was very shocked to learn that was not at all how measurement operated in the digital marketing sphere. And so, when I started working, my first ad tech job was really at Google. And, Google's really steeped in last click and what I'm going to call more generally post-exposure attribution. And that was just the way that people measured and assigned millions and billions of dollars of ad spend. And, I always thought that it was kind of wild that was the case. But weirdly, that's something that's lived on and kind of persisted at all different companies that I've worked at. And big, sophisticated advertisers continue to rely on that type of measurement. Whereas, what I believe to be the best way to approach measurement is to do, any kind of randomized controlled trials, really focusing on causal methodologies that let you understand if your ads are actually driving an outcome and not if the outcome is correlated to the ad exposure. I'm sure we'll get into that in a lot of depth, but really that's one thing that hasn't changed. What has changed is the technology that is used for tracking the different signals that are going to feed into the measurement systems. For the more sophisticated measurement technology, there's been a lot of really interesting evolutions on creating these types of control groups and these types of causal measurement technologies. But the adoption, I don't think, has been, really what I've expected. These days, you pointed out, measurement is largely contingent on privacy and data and the regulations and, OS, let's say, as the regulations like what's going on with Apple and privacy regulations that are governmental, imposed by governments. That's really driving a lot of measurement in modern times. And so I think for the modern marketer, you've got to be across all of those things and really understand what the sweet spot is. For what it's worth, and sure, again, we'll get into it. I do think there is a path to getting at some really high quality measurement through all of this noise here, but it's not an easy path, and it's also not a pleasant path to hear about. So I think it requires a lot of people to rethink a lot of pieces of ad tech that people hold for granted.
Yeah, and I guess given that, over the years and given the changes that have been brought on by Apple and governments, are you surprised it took that long? Have you been Did you feel a little bit like a canary in the coal mine? You're like, this is going to come and we got to prepare. And everyone was sort of like, didn't buy it. Like, what is sort of your take on, like, it feels like it came fast, but did it come, was it kind of like an overnight phenomenon that took 10 years?
Yeah. I mean, I think you characterized that super well. It was foreshadowed a lot. I think we started talking about it Snap in like 2018 or 2019. And, even at that time, there was some privacy regulation that we had to consider. So yes, certainly it was something that I think the industry as a whole had a lot of lead time to try to figure out. But I think there was this sort of, I don't know, disbelief that it was going to go through. And folks thought there's no way that some of this really draconian type data privacy is going to pass, and we're not going to have to deal with that. And people kind of kept punting it until eventually the reality of the deadlines was there, and the procrastination kind of hit everybody, kind of square in the face, and people were scrambling to try to adhere to the new regulations. So yeah, I mean, it's surprising that so many platforms were so unprepared, I would say. And my personal perspective on the whole situation, by the way, I was psyched. Like I was super excited, because what I thought was going to happen with all of this privacy, the privacy changes, is that stupid measurement would be killed, basically, because you can't really do stupid measurement if you don't have all the granular data that you can connect. Weirdly, that's not happened, or at least not yet. Which to me is another kind of surprising piece of the whole thing. But I really thought that the privacy changes were going to force a lot more people to consider more intelligent ways of valuing their marketing spend.
And Andrew, I mean, you touched on a lot there. I think maybe for myself and listeners, we hear a lot about measurement, attribution, obviously privacy concerns, PII, maybe help break that down a little bit. Like, are these all the same things? Are they all really tightly coupled together, or are they all different? Like, how do you view that world and all these terms that get thrown around?
Yeah. Let's, let me try to think of a good way to explain this. So old school measurement, what I would consider old school measurement, classical measurement, is kind of like classical physics versus quantum physics. Okay. Classical physics, imagine a billiard ball table, you have all of the balls are moving in certain ways. You can understand all of the component pieces, and all of those component pieces in the ad tech world, they're all keyed on some personal information. They're all keyed on user level data that allows you to essentially have a record of, who did what, at what time, what ad did they see, when did they convert. I'm simplifying a lot here because there's a lot of connections and data interconnections that have to happen. But at a zooming way out, that's how you can kind of imagine classical measurement. So there's nothing probabilistic about it. You can kind of say, Andrew saw this ad on this platform. He later saw this ad on another platform. Then he searched for this term on this other site, and he eventually bought, whatever item that he was looking for. Therefore, we can think of some way to split up the credit between the different channels and interactions that he's had. So that's kind of old school classical measurement. Again, it's all predicated on the ability to link this data across the different platforms and channels at the user level. And so that's sort of what's been under fire, what's been under a lot of scrutiny from Apple, from regulators. Should that be allowed? Should people, because by the way, folks in general don't, they don't know that that's happening, or at least they don't have a significant awareness that that's happening. So imagine all these platforms are passively collecting this user level data, sharing it all with the purpose of trying to show you better ads and value those ads. So that's the classical world where we're kind of in right now, because all of these regulations have broken essentially the ability for us to stitch all this data together. We've got to think of things more statistically, right? So in aggregate, what is happening at a channel level, at a campaign level? We can't really point to a single person, user interaction and say this interaction caused X% of this conversion down the line, because you don't have that connection anymore. So you have to think of other ways to do more aggregate style measurement. And again, we can probably get into this in a little bit, but things like MMM, and econometric modeling, things like aggregate level experimentation at a geo level, stuff like that. That's all kind of methodologies that will let you value, your outcomes and how much ads are driving those outcomes without needing to know that path to conversion at a user level. And so that's kind of the quantum physics, if we go back to my analogy of measurement versus the classical physics of measurement.
And I guess in that world, do you anticipate that like who kind of gets to win in that scenario? Is it the ones like still driving more exposure? Is it the ones that have more intent? Like, who does that set up best for? And maybe who was getting too much credit in the past? I don't know if you have a point of view on that, but it feels like if the board's changing this much, like what do you expect to change in terms of like the effectiveness?
Totally. So first of all, I would say everybody's getting too much credit. I don't think that there is an undervalued platform out there. There are some that are less overvalued than others. And I think, what I've seen is that can be surprising, frankly, and not to be partisan here with respect to our, alma mater of Snap, but I do think Snap is one of the more undervalued platforms that's out there. Again, this is just from objective experimentation. I'm not associated with Snap in a big way at this time. Still a fan, but obviously still a fan of the other platforms as well. But really, everybody is overvalued. I haven't seen really an incrementality test that we've run over all of the years, all the different platforms where, the rule would be it's a small percentage of the conversions you think you're getting are actually being driven by the ads and not, oh my gosh, we're driving so many more than we thought, right? Unless you're doing something really, really wrong on the measurement front. That's typically the case. And so, that's just something that I think, advertisers need to be aware of. Like, really, if you look at what's going on out there, there's probably tens of billions, if not more, of dollars of advertising that is not being deployed effectively, that is not driving actual incremental conversions that are caused by those ads. I strongly believe that. And that doesn't mean that ads don't work. Quite the opposite. I think they do work very well, but if you're not measuring them correctly, you're wasting a lot of dollars. But back to your original question about who's winning, who ends up winning in this world is somebody that can, platform or a series of platforms that can close the loop. And you can see that with some of the partnerships that are coming into play right now, some of the strategic bets that the platforms are making. Anybody that can show ads and capture the end conversion can win measurement. And frankly, you don't have to do intelligent measurement to be able to win in measurement. They just have to be able to close the loop. Because then what you can do is you can use that data to optimize better. Therefore, you can show people ads that are going to drive more conversions, and you can show that those conversions are driven by the ads. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so, platforms like Amazon are definitely going to win this space. Apple, they're definitely going to win as well. And all of the investments that they're making on the conversion side and the purchase side of things are really going to drive it home. So that's definitely type of platforms that are, closed loop are going to be the winners here.
And I guess from, if there has been like a almost like systemic overinvestment in paid media, right? If that's like the end result of this is that like ads work, but people have just been spending too much on ads. Does that mean like for retailers, for brands, just like advertisers in general, like, does that mean that potentially they will have better margins over time that they can, or does that mean they're gonna have to invest more into brand? Like, where do you think that cash kind of rolls into if that is the case?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if necessarily it's you can save money by just advertising less, but I think that the mix is off, and I think that advertisers need to spend a lot more time and energy into measuring things correctly. And let me kind of explain why that is, right? I mentioned in the last question, I said the self-fulfilling prophecy, and this is something that I've started to believe very strongly in, and I'll give you some evidence on what this is. So if you think about how you guys know, you've worked at ad platforms, for a long time as well, and how ad platforms work. They take a bunch of data based on what the users are doing on the platform, potentially off the platform as well, and they make a prediction about what types of engagement will this person have with an ad? What type of conversion will this ad, will they have as a result of this ad? But all of that is correlative. They're very good, ad platforms are extremely good at predicting behavior, right? That's why when you're on Instagram and you feel like you've been talking about, I don't know, we're talking about golf, feel like you've been talking about golf, all of a sudden you're getting golf ads. It's not because Instagram is listening to your conversation as much as people think that information is being piped into ads. No, maybe there's some listening going on. I won't comment on that. I don't think there is, but that it's not being fed into the ads. What Instagram understands is your behavior, and it understands that somebody like who's performing your behavior is really into golf, and therefore you should see some golf ads. Okay, so that's really, really great, except that it's not going to find the person that is going to be influenced by the golf ad because they're seeing the golf ad. There's a correlation of somebody who is already intrinsically interested in golf and therefore will likely buy golf-related activity, golf-related items, and you're showing them ads. There's no causality, or there's at least a significantly reduced causality with respect to the ads being shown and the outcome being driven, right? And so the measurement is reflective of that behavior. The measurement is also how many conversions did I attain after seeing this ad, 7 days after seeing this ad, 7 days after clicking on this ad, 28 days after viewing this ad, whatever it happens to be, right? That is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're measuring things in the same way that you're optimizing for them, and therefore you're going to see success. But what it's not telling you is how many people converted because they saw those ads, right? And it's a very subtle difference, but that because is what advertisers, going back to the question, is what advertisers need to double down on. And, a lot are getting it. And there's a lot of folks that are understanding that, hey, we need to do incrementality-based testing to understand the because component, but there's still a lot that aren't. And when I worry in this privacy-oriented world where it's harder and harder to join data, to do smart measurement. So it's harder to do dumb measurement, but it's also harder in some ways to do smart measurement. We're going to lose the ability and kind of default to just taking what these platforms are giving us, post-exposure conversions, and try to optimize for that because it's easy, it's there, it's simple. But is it right? I don't know. I don't think so.
And it's super interesting. And I think, we talk now a lot about kind of those performance-driven platforms, the insights that can be driven, mentality. How do you think about platforms that historically have not been performance-oriented or direct response-oriented, that they're not necessarily actively trying to drive a conversion? So you might think of that as like a Spotify or kind of audio ads or Roku or streaming. How do you think about measurement for those types of channels?
Yeah, so something again that may or may not be a popular opinion. I think all advertising is performance advertising, right? I don't think that any advertiser should spend a dime on an ad that they don't think will ultimately drive some kind of top line growth for the business. And that doesn't mean that it necessarily has to directly okay, I heard this Spotify ad and right now I'm going to click on it, click on something or go somewhere else to buy something. But you need to be able to draw a causal link between the ad exposure and some kind of downstream purchase. So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of do that without needing to kind of go into more of a traditional DR based measurement. You can do brand lift and polling based studies. You can do that kind of work. But again, I think where a lot of the bigger, more sophisticated advertisers have solved this, a lot of them haven't. A lot of smaller advertisers haven't. Is understanding what does 1 point of brand recall mean for an ultimate conversion? What does an intent to purchase, if we increase that, what does that actually mean for real purchases? And how can I measure that? I think it's insufficient to stop at the brand outcome and say, yay, we drove 5 points of brand recall. Go us. I mean, great. I can remember the ad, but if I don't go into the store and buy the item, what's the point? Right. And so I think the platforms, and I think they are getting Spotify, definitely is working. I know that they're trying to work with different programs to get performance kind of oriented metrics going, and most platforms are. But I think as an advertiser, it's fine to get a proxy metric, something that's easier to measure, something that's a little more upper funnel, but make sure that you understand the implications to the down funnel activities and make sure that you invest the time to assess that assess it regularly because it's going to change.
Yeah, it's interesting as you say this, like you're thinking about just how Amazon, like even with Prime Video and, I don't use Amazon Music, but like if this all kind of works the way you're talking about, Amazon obviously is going to be extremely performant and there's going to be a lot of ad revenue they can use to fund a lot of content. It kind of feels like on that side, that could become self-fulfilling too, where like, you can imagine if that's the case, you're going to see Apple have to get way more serious about e-com and Google. Yeah, it's sort of like, it'll be interesting to like these e-com sales or what are ultimately funding content that can then create inventory for, it's going to get pretty interesting.
I guess I think it's a great point. Yeah, I you're totally right about that.
For the ones that don't have the ability to close the loop, and we can use the Snap, for example, or we can use Reddit to some extent, Spotify. Is that like where you see kind of like the importance around clean rooms and like why, the idea of at least having some form of data collaboration? Like, is that something that you think, I guess, well, A, can you explain it to listeners? Because I think a lot of people hear it, but don't really know what it means. And then two, if that's, the idea of data collaboration in some form or another, like, will that stand sort of the test of regulatory time? Like, what's your take kind of maybe on both?
Yeah, I love this question for a couple of reasons. One, I did a lot of early work on quote unquote clean rooms at Meta/Facebook when I worked there. And really the concern at that time was less around, are the platforms seeing user level data, but it's more around, I don't want my data as a advertiser of Meta to reside and be stored at Meta because I don't trust what's going to happen with it. So I still want to join the data, but I don't want Meta to have full ownership over it. And so that was the programs that we kind of designed to solve that problem. But it's gone one step further. So, by way of answering part of your question, what are clean rooms? If I were to describe it in a way that's kind of easy to comprehend, it's a way to mesh data in a capacity that none of the entities that are meshing that data understand that aggregated, or I should say the combined data, right? So if Snap or ad platform X is contributing to this clean room and advertiser Y is contributing to that clean room, neither advertiser X or advertiser, I got the letters all mixed up. So let me try to say that one more time. So let's say the best way to explain clean room is you've got an ad platform that's contributing data to the clean room. You've got an advertiser that is also contributing data to the clean room. The data is getting joined, but the advertiser does not see the ad platform's data and vice versa. And really, if it's done right, nobody, even the clean room itself, can look at that underlying data set and understand anything meaningful from it. But you can still ostensibly do the same types of, user level metrics and calculations that you can do now. It's just that you do it in a way that nobody can understand the underlying data. And so if you think about what that means, is that actually solving the problems and the concerns that people have about privacy right now? I would argue that it's not. I would say it's semantics, and that it's giving, a protective ability to keep doing ad tech the way ad tech's been done for a long time, but at the same time, not you be able to kind of put your hand up and say, look, I can't see any of the underlying data. I'm not storing any of the underlying data at user level. And so, we're blameless. But the end result is users are still going to see very targeted, if it's done right, if the technology eventually evolves to be able to do this. You're still going to be able to see those kind of quote unquote creepy ads that are following you and all of that. Like a good clean room eventually will be able to facilitate that type of use case. So it's not going to fundamentally change the concerns or ameliorate the concerns that people have around ads are being creepy and they know too much about it. They still know it all. It's just now it's stored in a way that nobody understands at a user level, which, by the way, ad platforms, like, this is a huge misconception. People think that there's somebody at Meta or Google or whatever that's like going in and looking at their history at a use. No, nobody's doing that. There's billions, trillions of data points. It's not possible to do that. So even if the stuff is not, stored in a way that's protected, that has all the differential privacy and everything that clean rooms provide, it's still not, it is still being collected from you. And clean rooms are not going to change the collection. They're going to change the storage, right? And so I think this is where we need to potentially rethink how ad tech is done from a foundational perspective, right? And so one of the things that I am a huge proponent of is contextual advertising. I think there's a ton of technology right now that can make contextual advertising really, really impressive and work really, really well. And that drastically reduces the amount of signal that needs to get, the types of signal that needs to get collected and stored at a user level, So I mean, I think there are other ways to solve the ad tech problem without going down the clean room route.
And can we maybe go deeper on that? So, give us an example of contextual advertising. Why is this something that is now potentially more important or more impactful? Why is it better for users and privacy and potentially advertisers? Why now, and why contextual advertising versus what advertisers have been accustomed to?
Yeah, contextual advertising right now, there's so much more power in terms of the machine learning capabilities and with some of the AI capabilities that are coming up now, that you can look at what behavior is in an instantaneous kind of capacity. And I strongly believe that you can create a profile, and again, an instantaneous snapshot of that person's headspace, their propensity to be influenced by ads, and aggregate the propensity to be influenced by certain types of ads. You can generate all of those models a lot more cleanly than you could in the past, and you don't need this stitching of data. Of course, every time you stitch data, it's going to make something better, but people don't want that. The regulators don't want that. Stitching of the data is just too messy. And I think that there's a lot more potential to be able to get more intelligent about applying contextual advertising, really trying to understand what the person is doing in that moment, where they are, what their behavior patterns are on a particular platform, and be able to serve an intelligent ad and the right ad to them in an intelligent capacity.
It's interesting when you kind of explain it that way. Like the market has gotten so addicted to kind of like the surveillance state kind of approach, right? And obviously it's worked well historically, but, and it's going to be hard for them, I think, probably to move off it. But this sort of AI driven, like reactive approach that you're describing, which can happen very quickly, it seems so much cleaner. Like if someone can do it right and really invest in it and probably like to some extent have the kind of the pain tolerance to rip the Band-Aid off and like move towards that, you could imagine, it's sort of like going from internal combustion to like electric, like it's such a simpler, what you're describing feels so much simpler if you could actually pull it off. Do you think that like, will there be stories in the near term where people start to look at it and say, we're kind of overcomplicating this with all this surveillance and maybe we move? Like, what do you think? And is that a fair description of kind of the lay of the land?
I don't, I'm very pessimistic about Band-Aids being ripped off. I think there's too much at stake. So all of that perpetual, that self-perpetuating or self-fulfilling prophecy I described to you, it's generating tens or hundreds of billions of dollars worth of advertising revenue. And so, to rethink ad tech from the ground up. Yeah, I mean, there's too much money at stake to rip the Band-Aid off. It requires like a full rebuild of ad tech from the ground up to do it right. So I don't see that as happening. And I actually think that the clean rooms are kind of a symptom of that, right? People are searching for, how can I still do everything that I did before, but appease the any regulations that are there, and make sure that I'm not in hot water with OS policies that are being put in place like ATT. And so that's where clean rooms are. And by the way, I've been kind of down on clean rooms. It's not to say I don't think there's a use for them. I just think that, they are going to be more for larger platforms, maybe agencies, folks like that. But I don't think they're going to be accessible. At least they aren't right now accessible to the average ad tech platform, smaller kind of ad tech platform and smaller marketer. And that's who's suffering, most with the privacy oriented changes. And so that's why I think that, innovation needs to arise to help those platforms. So again, there is, in my view, from a measurement side of things, there is certainly a way that you can approach, you can do some of the aggregate style measurement I mentioned before. That does work. I've seen it work for smaller platforms, certainly. But I think more and more, those types of marketers are going to need to consider alternative types of styles of advertising. And more there's market demand for it, the more the ad platforms are going to react. And so, but really it all goes down to good measurement, right? Like measure things in a smart, scientific way, understand what works and what doesn't, and then tell the advertisers what's working, or the advertising platforms what's working, what isn't, right? And force them to do smart things.
All of that and how it's playing out is really interesting. And, there's so many stakeholders involved, right? There are the big brands, the Shopify, commerce, smaller brands, platforms themselves. You said tech providers like clean rooms, like other measurement solutions, or innovators coming up. And what does this all mean for all of those different stakeholders, if it means something different for each of them individually even?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity right now. And this is, I feel like I have been a little bit of Debbie Downer in some of the responses here. So I'll kind of give you the optimistic piece right now, which is for platforms. And I think Shopify is an interesting example. I know they're starting to build out an ad business, they've had an ad business, but they're kind of evolving it and whatnot. But for platforms that are just getting started in ads that have a lot of clout, build it right from the get-go. There's a huge opportunity to not do this self-fulfilling prophecy thing where you're building correlative optimization with correlative measurement. Build a system that actually shows ads that influence people, and optimize it such that in a causal capacity, and offer causal measurement to prove that's happening, right? And I don't think that there's been enough investment in that, again, because the motivations just aren't there for the long-standing platforms to go that route. But for new platforms, do that, explore what contextual advertising can do, measure that. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, right? But the only way to understand truly if anything, whatever the methodology is, to understand if it works, is to measure it in an appropriate capacity. And there are a lot of really innovative. So that's what I mean. So there's opportunity for the kind of larger platforms to do something innovative in that space, and to kind of move towards more causal based advertising.
I guess with that, if you could put on your crystal ball, whatever that saying is, you can fast forward 5 years. What does measurement look like? What does the ads industry look like? And it honestly is I'm curious what you think about measurement, but I'm also just as a result of it, what's going to happen? We've all benefited a lot from sort of the last 20 years of how ad tech has evolved. What's going to happen 5 years from now? Are we going to be excited, nervous? What's your take?
I really think that we're going to be excited. I think that right now it's a tough time, but I do think that in some ways we are turning a corner. There's a lot of really interesting innovation on measurement type, on smart ways to do measurement. And I think that's going to continue to grow. I think eventually people will understand that just collecting tons and tons and tons of data and not being able to use it is just not what consumers want. It's not helpful. And so there's going to be two camps. There's going to be the folks that can do that and actually make use of it. And so these walled gardens that are now fully walled, and they've got a full closed loop, they're going to be fine. They're going to keep collecting data, but they're going to be increasingly isolated. Maybe there'll be some cleaner bridges that allow these folks to play nice. But I mean, if history is any guide, there's always been a way for the ad platforms to collaborate to show cross-platform measurement, and they've really not leaned into that extensively unless they've been forced into it. So, that kind of world will persist. But I think eventually the average advertiser will understand that there's ways to do that on your own that doesn't require tons of data, that does not require the buy-in from the ad platforms, and that's ultimately going to lead to a more healthy ecosystem. But again, I'm excited about all of the privacy barriers that are being put up, because I do think that net it eliminates or reduces the ability to do dumb things with data. And I'm hopeful that it continues to accelerate. It's just the timelines keep getting pushed further and farther out, right? Cookie deprecation keeps getting pushed out. Apparently it's coming. I've heard rumors that, silly types of attribution are going to be deprecated in tools like GA. And so that's great. But that's the world that I look forward to, where it's harder and harder to do dumb things with measurement, and that forces you to innovate and think about, how can I really measure things correctly?
Yeah, another thing that kind of comes to mind when you say that about, you described the walled gardens, and it's, I think everyone kind of thinks of the walled gardens of all being the same, but I think the way you just explained it as like the fully walled gardens, that may be where you're starting to see the difference of like the walled gardens that are not full walled gardens are really struggling right now. And a lot of the kind of animosity towards them may not be as sort of valid.
Maybe we ended there, that let's stop doing dumb measurement. Let's work towards smarter measurement, and let's be optimistic. It sounds like, despite, I think, the challenges that you've outlined today, that platforms, brands, that everyone in this space is facing, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and there's something to be optimistic towards.
Yeah.
And, I think we could probably go on for another hour, 2 hours. We won't do that today. We have you back on and go deeper on some of this. But in the meantime, where can people follow you? Where can they get in touch?
Yeah, I keep a low profile, but I'm on LinkedIn, just Andrew Covato, all one word. I do, as the guys mentioned earlier, some consulting work, and I'm always happy to talk measurement and incrementality. So if anybody disagrees with anything I said or vehemently agrees, love to hear from you. Shoot me a note. Love to chat measurement, particularly smart measurement.
Love it. Andrew, thank you again. Thank you to listeners. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and follow Market on Twitter and with Market HQ. Until next week. Thank you.
Thank you.